Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Cognitive Capacity Assessments in Criminal Elder Abuse Cases, hosted by the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative. Next slide. So just a few housekeeping items to go over today. Today's webinar will be recorded. You will be provided with the information from the webinar on the EJI website. All attendees are going to enter the webinar in listen-only mode. You will not be able to unmute yourself. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A pod or in the main chat box. We will do our best to address them during the webinar, but if we cannot, they will be addressed during the Q&A session, hopefully before we conclude. Also, just wanted to let you know that apologies, that closed captioning message is actually incorrect. Closed captioning is available via the show captions button at the bottom of your screen. And I just wanted to give a big thanks to our ASL interpreters who will be helping us out on today's webinar. Now I will pass it to Chantel Smith from the Elder Justice Initiative.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just a little bit of background about EJI and some other programs we have, and then we'll get to it. For those of you not familiar with the Elder Justice Initiative, it is a part of the Department of Justice, and its mission is to support and coordinate its enforcement and programmatic efforts to combat elder abuse, neglect, and financial fraud and scams targeting older adults. We do this by, of course, promoting justice for older adults, providing support and help to both victims and their families, supporting and enhancing state and local efforts, supporting their work with training and resources, and also conducting and supporting research to improve policy and practice. You'll see here an illustration of exactly what we do and how we do it, which includes outreach materials, an MDT, multidisciplinary team guide and toolkit. We have a video series for prosecutors. We have information for law enforcement and others as well. You'll find research on the website, statutes, which we are updating. We have a plethora of webinars. For those of you who have not gone out to look at those webinars, I urge you to take a look. Many topics are covered, many speakers, and we're talking about law enforcement, prosecutors, medical, health, all of that. You'll find good information there. And of course, financial exploitation and reporting information. You'll find good resources about scams and areas and agencies to which you can report. Also included here is information on EAGLE. That's the Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement. Again, if you've not been out to look at that website, you'll see that in the corner, eagle.usc.edu. Please go out and take a look at it. It is targeted to law enforcement, but I can assure you there's information relevant to all. You'll see there that there are checklists for law enforcement, roll call videos. We also have state-specific laws on there, which we are updating. We're in the process of updating those now. There's also training materials there. You can scan the QR code and it will get you to EAGLE. Next slide. You'll see the QR code again, more information. You'll see the website there, also an email address where you can get specific information from EAGLE. Again, it's targeted to law enforcement, but for all professionals, certainly there's information on there helpful to the public as well. And again, please go there. One more slide. This is what it looks like. You'll also find community resources available on there. And just to give you a little view of the website itself, you'll see there that you can also access it on your cell phone. So thanks, everyone. All right, let's get going. We have really great information today. Again, welcome to all of you. We are thrilled and excited today to have Paige Ulrey and Dr. Veronica LoFaso with us. They are leaders in the elder justice effort, and we are very, very grateful to have them here today. Paige is a senior deputy prosecuting attorney with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in Washington State. Since her appointment in 2001 as the office's first elder abuse prosecutor, she has handled many cases involving neglect, financial exploitation, assault, and homicide. She co-leads King County's Elder Abuse Council and trains professionals nationwide. She has testified before the U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging and at White House Elder Justice conferences. We appreciate all that you do, Paige, so thank you for being here. Dr. Veronica LoFaso is an associate professor of clinical medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College and is a leader in geriatrics and palliative medicine and has been for over 27 years. She founded Weill Cornell's medical home visit program and has received multiple awards for excellence in teaching and humanism in medicine. She has expertise in the forensic aspects of elder abuse and has collaborated on the instrument for decisional abilities, a tool that can be used to assess client decision-making capacity. She also served as the medical director of multidisciplinary elder abuse teams in New York City. We are very grateful to have her here today as well, and we're excited to hear from both of you. So without further ado, Paige and Dr. LoFaso.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be sharing this webinar with my good colleague, Paige Ulrey. We're going to start with just a couple of definitions just to get us all on the same page. So let's start with, first of all, what is cognition? And basically, it is a range of mental processes that relate to acquiring, storing, manipulating, retaining, and retrieving information. Cognitive capacity is how well or to what extent an individual has developed these processes. So what is their mental bandwidth? What is an individual's ability to manipulate information and to use it to solve a problem or make a decision? Next slide. Paige, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, it requires unmuting myself, I guess. Sorry about that. We want to start out, first of all, by just asking you all, why do we care about a potential victim's cognitive capacity in the criminal justice system? What difference does it make to us? And if you put answers in the chat, that would be great. So we see, goes to the heart of what is consent, witness capacity, to have a credible witness, providing testimony, vulnerability. Can they give consent? Ensuring the criminal justice system is fair to all. Validation and competency of providing testimony. Great answers, you guys. Impacts undue influence risk to determine if they are able to participate in the trial, etc. Really great answers, and all of them are right. And what Ronnie and I have been coming to as we sort of were formulating this PowerPoint is how essential this question of capacity is to almost all of the elder abuse cases that we respond to. And, you know, we have to know capacity in order to figure out what our theory is of the case, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But even more important than that, it's essential to our figuring out whether or not a crime has occurred. And especially in financial exploitation cases, we have the right to do what we want to with our money. And if we give our money to someone and that gift is something that our children are very unhappy with, you know, we've got to figure out, does that victim have capacity? Because inevitably in these cases, consent, as some of you have pointed out, is the most common defense that gets raised in these cases. And that's also true in neglect cases, and it's true in sexual assault cases involving other adults. So essential to determining, you know, whether a crime was committed, whether or not a consent defense that gets raised is legitimate. We define consent as freely, voluntarily, and with knowledge of the true nature of the act or transaction and the consequences of that act or transaction in question, making a decision or consenting to something. And we can't determine whether there was true consent in a case unless we know whether the person had capacity to make the decision at issue. And again, if we have an unpopular decision by an older person, it's very easy for the kids to say, hey, that's not okay. You know, that clearly they were the victim of exploitation. But we don't know that until we know the facts of the case and we know whether the victim had capacity to give that consent. When we do file charges, it also defines our case theory. Did the victim have capacity and fail to consent? Did they lack capacity to consent? And was that incapacity evident to the perpetrator? Or in cases where the victim had some capacity, was that consent obtained through undue influence or deception? So it's really central not only to making charging decisions, but also to how we charge criminal elder abuse cases. Competency is something you all have also raised in the chat, and it's also very essential to our elder abuse cases. And that's a different question. That's something that's determined by the court. And that is the question of whether someone has mental soundness necessary to either stand trial or to testify. And the way that comes up in our criminal elder abuse cases typically is that defense raises a challenge to the victim's competency to testify when the victim has dementia. So again, this is something that is very common in our cases, and it's essential for us to know the degree of a victim's cognitive impairment to be able to answer these questions.
So we're going to start by showing you a video. This is Mr. Phillips. He's a retired college professor, and a report was made to the police that he was a victim of theft by someone he met recently, to whom he's gifted a very large sum of money. I'm sure you've all heard this story before. And what you're going to see is our esteemed colleague, Dr. Laura Mosqueda, who's an experienced geriatrician and an expert in the field of elder abuse. She's going to conduct a capacity evaluation of Mr. Phillips, and then we'll come back on the other side of the video.
Got out of the service. My folks had moved from Glendale, which I dearly love, down to Orange County. And so I was down there, and I started college at Santa Ana College when it was in North Main. And on Valentine's Day dance that year, I went to the dance and I asked this young lassie if she'd care to trip the light fantastic, and she said yes.
Was her name Barbara?
Yeah, she suffered the consequences ever since. And so then I'm very slow on some of this stuff, so 10 days later I asked her if she'd marry me. And she took a chance and said yes, so we had 66 wonderful years.
66 years, wow.
Yeah.
Now, I know you also went to graduate school.
Yes, after Santa Ana College, I went to Pomona College in Claremont.
Yep.
I dearly love that place. They had vets housing there, so we stayed in vets housing at Pomona College. And then I went to Claremont Graduate School and stayed in vets housing there.
And what did you study?
Psychology. I'm a licensed psychologist, one of the first in California.
So tell us then what your sort of profession was, what you did with that degree then.
We eventually, I taught briefly while I was finishing up my master's. I taught briefly at 6th grade in Ontario, and then we moved down to Orange County because I got a job. I had several offers, but I decided because my folks and Barbara's, my wife's folks, lived in that area, and they were, in both cases, quite senior, that we should move down there. So we moved to Santa Ana and lived with Barbara's grandmother for a short while. Then we rented and so forth and so on. But
and most of your career was where?
Most of it.
I mean, what sort of work were you doing?
Well, I was teaching at Orange Coast College most of the time. 36 years at Orange Coast College. I created a number of courses, and I did institutional research. I taught introductory, advanced general research methodology for the behavioral sciences. Statistics is one of my better students called it sadistics. Yeah. And I did all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Wow. So what's your living circumstance now? Do you live by yourself or with other people?
I live by myself. Very few people could endure me.
Okay.
Yeah.
do you do your own cooking and shopping and those sorts of things, or do you
Well,
get a
our
little
sweet
help? or-
daughter does shopping, and then I kind of put the stuff together when she's not here, and
Okay.
try to endure my own fixings.
Okay.
And
At least you know who to complain to if you don't
well,
like it.
that's right.
Right. Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So do you cook or use a microwave or
Oh, I don't do cooking, microwave.
microwave?
Yeah, or stuff that doesn't need cooking.
Okay. And then what do you do in terms of things like banking and finance? Do you do all that by yourself, or do you get a little help? or?
Linda, our daughter, is a big help on that. Yeah.
Okay.
We might celebrate together about any decision fiscally.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard the celebrate together phrase before.
Yeah.
I like it, even though it's really
Well,
hard to
I
say.
like to celebrate together too, as well as celebrate.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when a financial decision is being made, then you and Linda
Yeah, we confer.
confer and then make a decision, and
Yeah,
she sort of
yeah.
assists with what, the paperwork, or
Well, Linda's expert on the paperwork,
okay.
but we confer together about any major decisions about stock. And we have a number of S&Ls, and some bonds, and I have a company, a local company that I confer with about bonds, and
Okay.
they send me reports every now and then.
Uh-huh. Do you ever
Got out of the service.
So we want to ask you guys through a poll a couple of questions. One, do you think Mr. Phillips is competent to testify? And two, does he have the capacity to gift money to his new friend? So the answers are yes, no, or maybe. Give you a few minutes for that. Let's see, people, everyone, can we get the results of the poll? Okay, so it looks like, yes, he's competent to testify by a significant majority. Small percentage, 11 people thought, no, he's not competent. And then maybe 119 people, so about 40% thought maybe. Okay, great. And what about the capacity question? The results of that. Oh, they're all in one question. I see. Okay, so the question, okay, so we'll just leave it at that. So we'll say for now, it sounds like a lot of people were at a maybe. There were different, yes, there are two separate questions. Is he competent to testify, and does he have capacity? Two very different questions. And Ronnie and I will come back to that and give you guys some more information on that. But you're right. I mean, I think the competency question is, can he basically relay facts? Clearly no problem with that. Does he have capacity to gift money is more complicated. And I think that's probably where most of you answered maybe. So we will keep discussing this. So Ronnie, you want to talk about capacity? Ronnie, I can't hear you. while you work on that, I'm just going to go address a couple more of the responses. People would want to do another interview. They would want to know about a little bit more about how he did in testing. So there's basically a general consensus, I think, that we need more information to determine the capacity question. Ronnie, you want to try again?
Yeah, I'm trying again.
You're back. You're back. No, she's not. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, everyone.
It's,
It's
don't
always
worry.
the worst nightmare. Okay, so anyway, we're talking now about capacity in older adults, and it can be impaired by several different conditions, and so we'll go over those. But it's important to know, first of all, what the medical history is for an individual, because the first 4 items that are on the slide here can very much show a fluctuation in their level of alertness, and because of that, their ability to make a decision or have capacity. So the time of day, their state of health, whether or not they're complying with medications or not, this is all important when one is considering whether someone has capacity. This is not to say that across the board, for instance, that schizophrenic individuals cannot make decisions and don't have capacity. If they're properly medicated and they're on a stable regimen, they most certainly do have decisional ability. That's true of depressive patients with psychotic features, for instance. So if their conditions are stable, they most certainly can, but those 4 conditions do lend themselves to fluctuation in level of alertness that affects capacity. On the other hand, the lower 2 items, traumatic brain injury and dementia, those have a more stable level of alertness, and you wouldn't expect a huge fluctuation. Sometimes you can see it in dementia, but most of the time it's a more stable level of cognition, of level of alertness, and they would be more able to make rational decisions. Next slide.
Yeah, but Ronnie, in the chat, we have a number of people mentioning UTIs and how that can also affect capacity.
Yes, that's a great point. Infection, absolutely. So, when we talk about delirium, really, what we really are talking about here in the first 4 conditions, excuse me, is delirium. And there are many, many, many physical things, a urinary tract infection being one of them, any kind of infection that can lead to delirium. So you're right, there are many, many medical conditions that lead to delirium, and a UTI is a classic for an older adult. Yeah.
And the reason that matters to us in the criminal justice system is because if we can get those underlying conditions treated, then that person may well end up being someone who's a very effective witness and someone who can give us very good information on the case.
Okay, next slide. So dementia, dementia is an overarching umbrella. I think many of you know that. It's not just Alzheimer's disease. It includes quite a few different diagnoses. We're not going to get into all of them today, but it is an umbrella term, and it incorporates loss of memory, which is often the first symptom that people experience, but also difficulty with language, problem solving, executive function or judgment, we call judgment, and other thinking abilities that are severe enough to really interfere with their daily life. So executive function, when we talk about that, what we really mean is, are they able to do a complex task? Can they organize and address a problem and complete a task? It's kind of like keeping more than one ball up in the air, an ability to plan, to reason, to prioritize. And in general, so what we see is that individuals with dementia, unfortunately, it is a progressive disease with a life expectancy of somewhere between 6 and 8 years, depending on when they're diagnosed. And it is progressive. Now, it can progress very differently from person to person. So if you are a very high functioning person with excellent care and generally good health, you could go decades with dementia. Other individuals may not be as lucky, especially if they have something called Lewy body. Some of you may have encountered that. So it's progressive. It's unfortunately at this point incurable, and obviously affects a huge amount of older adults. Next slide.
Ronnie, can I just jump in for a second and ask you about executive function?
Yeah.
We see a lot of cases where family members report financial exploitation, and what they're saying is that the older adult is like trusting this new person that's come into their life
Right.
implicitly, and suddenly, or actually not suddenly, but slowly not trusting the family anymore.
Right.
And we see this real change in who the older person brings into their inner circle. And usually that change corresponds to gifting that's unusual given their history. Can you just talk about that in the context of dementia?
Yeah. So, I mean, what happens is that older adults generally, as they get older, there's some interesting work, by the way, in financial exploitation relative to dementia. And what they're looking at now is that there are actually parts of the brain in certain individuals that puts them at risk for making bad decisions. And it's really fascinating work where they're looking at actual brain function in certain individuals that makes them vulnerable to these kinds of decisions. And the decisions are being made more on an emotional level than really on based on factual information. So they're extremely vulnerable to these kinds of individuals who come into their lives and incorporate themselves enough to clean out their finances. So we'll do next slide. So I think you're all aware that different decisions hold different levels of risk, right? So when we say that capacity is decision specific, that's what we're talking about. We're constantly assessing both risk and ability to make a reasonable decision. So, for instance, designating a power of attorney for your healthcare decisions doesn't necessarily require a very high level of cognitive function. You need to know the person, you need to trust the person, etc. Whereas something like making a very complicated will where there's a lot of players involved and huge amount of money's involved, or getting married, etc., or consenting to a serious medical procedure, for instance, are much more complex and require a higher level of cognition. And in fact, the literature shows that professionals, psychiatrists faced with different scenarios, who were asked to assess the capacity of certain individuals, the higher the level of risk, the more likely they were to say that that individual lacked capacity. So risk really plays into this whole picture very, very strongly. Next slide, please. So as I was mentioning before, the ability to handle one's finances might actually be the first clue that there's a decline or dementia, incipient dementia occurring. In fact, in my office, one of the first questions I ask is, have you had a late electric bill? Have you been late in paying, your electric bill, or, et cetera. And in fact, the literature bears that out, that 17.2% were of individuals who a year later developed Alzheimer's disease showed behavior like being delinquent in their mortgage payments, and 34% were delinquent in their credit card bills. So that's a big red flag in my practice when I see that kind of behavior, that, hey, I better look into this more. This could be the beginning of something more serious, and often is, unfortunately. Next slide. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention a colleague, Jason Karlowish, who is really an expert in this field, much more than I am. Jason is an amazing researcher and geriatrician. And he says, to the extent that cognition is impaired by reversible factors, such as delirium, which we mentioned, or medication side effects, treatment of the underlying condition can improve decision-making capacity. We mentioned that before with the treating a UTI, for instance. And generally, dementia alone does not result in significant fluctuation in cognition from moment to moment. Also, we discussed before. So a diagnosis of dementia alone does not exclude the ability to make certain decisions. And we want to avoid what we call dementiaism, right? To hearing the word dementia, oh, they can't make a decision. We have to avoid that. So the take-home message here really is that cognition and capacity are related, but should not be used interchangeably. One informs the other, but they are different. Next
And
slide.
Ronnie, I just want to point out, we hear that this fluidity argument a lot from defense attorneys in
Yeah.
financial exploitation cases where they say, oh, it may be that when they got evaluated by this doctor, they had some issues, but literally, 2 weeks earlier, they were fine, and it just changes from hour to hour. So that's assuming we can rule out delirium and some of the other things that could cause, a more temporary impairment. That's really not a realistic
Correct.
and true response. Is that right?
That's correct. I think, as you know already, cognitive impairment often creates vulnerability, as I mentioned before, and almost 50% of patients, this is an amazing statistic, actually, 50% of patients with dementia experience some form of abuse. And as we know, when there's one form of abuse, usually there are others lurking. So there's a huge, and I'm sure I'm missing it, and many of my colleagues are missing it, there's a huge amount of exploitation and abuse that's occurring in this population, as well as this statistic holds for patients with handicapped individuals as well. Next slide.
So, does the presence of any kind of cognitive impairment make a person incompetent to testify? I think the general answer to that is not necessarily. I've brought a number of cases where a victim with dementia has testified incredibly powerfully. In those cases, we had notes that they had taken around the time of the incident that we were able to get in and use to prompt their memory. But they were very able to relay sort of the heart of the matter and the gist of what had happened to them. And I think that's consistent with this study from Dr. Mosqueda and Dr. Wigglesworth, which found that people with dementia often retain memory of emotional or traumatic events much better than they do of other things. So they may have trouble remembering details of their day or of the last week or two, but when you talk to them about what happened when they were assaulted or when they were exploited, they can tell you very clearly. And that's something I think that is so important for us in criminal justice to think about as we address these cases.
Paige, can I just add to that?
Yeah.
And so interesting work. This is a little bit of a corollary to what you're saying, but interesting work again by Karlowicz and some of his colleagues about, well, you know what, we're going to talk about the mini mental in a minute. So I'll get to that when we get.
Okay.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. So I think we're addressing pretty well why assessing capacity is so important. It's important to us in the justice system as far as our ability to make proper and ethical charging decisions. We see a lot of assumptions being made about older adults just because they're old, that they have dementia or that they don't have dementia. And we've seen a number of cases brought by well-intentioned prosecutors who are responding to an allegation of financial exploitation by an adult child who is very unhappy about a gift their parent made to someone who is not in their family circle, or that they made to a different sibling. And the case is investigated, and throughout this investigation, there's just this assumption that because this person is in their 90s, they don't have capacity and that this was financial exploitation. But we don't know that until we get a capacity assessment and look at all the surrounding facts. So knowing a person's capacity through an assessment is essential to our ability to file charges ethically and properly. And then, as I said earlier, to determining our charging theory. And also on sort of on a more larger level or a larger scale, it ensures that an older adult's wishes are carried out as they desire. So even if someone has dementia, if we can, through an assessment, figure out what spheres they're impaired in and what ones they're not impaired in, we can help them live more consistently with what they want and how they desire to live. And if we find they lack financial capacity and their judgment is impaired as a result of dementia, we can then make referrals to adult protective services and to family members to get a protection order or a guardianship or conservatorship in order to protect their finances in the future. So it's really essential to mitigating this ageism and all the assumptions we make just because someone is old when we encounter a potentially criminal case. And I just think it's really crucial to our properly handling these cases, both as far as charging is concerned and as far as any kind of protection and deference to their wishes is concerned. Anything else you'd add to that, Ronnie?
No, I think that's perfect, Paige.
Okay.
So this slide speaks to really such a huge problem. I mean, we can talk for an hour just on this slide alone. And it's one of the biggest dilemmas I think that many of us face in dealing with these complicated elder abuse cases. As they mentioned in my introduction, I worked on multidisciplinary teams for many years, and there would be a large number of professionals trying to assist frontline workers who were struggling with patients who were at high risk, were offered interventions and then would decline the intervention. And so that created obviously a lot of stress for the workers, but also for the team in general. And so, you know, we really have to understand that if an individual has decision-making ability, again, we're returning to this mantra, then they have they have the ability to make a decision that we don't think is right for them. You know, but it's not our decision. We really have to avoid a paternalistic approach to things, and make sure that a well-done assessment for capacity is done so that we can feel morally and ethically sound that we've done everything we can to make sure that this person can make this bad decision. And I'm happy to say that in general, the field is moving a little bit away from a paternalistic approach where people are being referred less and less for guardianship, for instance, and we're trying to work out other solutions to this problem rather than just slapping on a guardianship case. And I'll leave you with my favorite new term that I learned from one of my palliative care colleagues, which is the dignity of risk. And I just love that term because it really speaks to the fact that you're hearing what an individual wants and you will give them as much leeway as you can. Granted, there will be some guardrails, but as much as you can to make decisions that they think are right, even if we don't like them. Next slide.
And Ronnie, just keeping in mind that we also are seeing so many cases where the assumption is the other way. The assumption is that the person is fine, and a 911 call is made or APS is made, and everyone's like, well, they seem really articulate, and I think they're choosing that, and then they turn out to lose their life savings to this person they met just a few months earlier. So it's a really delicate balance.
Yeah, absolutely, Paige, 100%. So capacity assessments, I'm not going to get too deep into the woods here, except to say that they need to be conducted by highly trained experts. And they really take the screening tests that we'll talk about those in a minute. They really take them to another level. It's a much more in-depth, longer evaluation. And they take into consideration the medical record. They can even go back and have, it can even be done retrospectively. And they just in general provide a much more thorough picture of what's going on. Again, screening tests are screening tests, and then you send people on for really formal capacity evaluations. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, these capacity evaluations need to be done by trained professionals. A lot of times, APS workers and primary care providers will do some kind of an assessment for decisional ability. Those are relatively brief and they're helpful in deciding if a further assessment is needed, but they are not diagnostic. And capacity evaluations really should be done by healthcare professionals, and healthcare professionals in particular who are skilled and trained in it. Many primary care physicians, unfortunately, when asked to do capacity assessments, will just do a simple mini-mental, very superficial kind of screening test and then assume that the person has capacity. So it's a little bit operator dependent in terms of who's doing the evaluation. It really needs to be a skilled person.
And we see, I think, a lot of over-reliance by people by prosecutors and criminal justice professionals on primary care provider records. And so they'll get the records as part of an investigation. And the doctor says, oh, they're fine. I don't think they have any dementia. But all they've done, if anything, is administer the MMSE. Yeah. And it ends up getting this kind of a false positive result as far as that person's capacity is concerned.
Yeah. So in terms of common screening tests, Paige just mentioned the MMSE, which is probably had been for years the most commonly used screening test. There's now also the MoCA, M-O-C-A, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test, which is used more widely now. And then there's the St. Louis Mental Status Exam and the MacArthur Competence Assessment Tool. All of these are screening tests. I can't emphasize this enough. They're screening tests for cognitive impairment or dementia. They are not screening tests for capacity. They're not diagnostic for dementia, although they certainly would and could suggest further testing and observation over time is needed. But I just to be clear, none of these are diagnostic. They are just screens for more intensive evaluations. And they're not as I said, they're not interchangeable with capacity assessments. Next slide. So these tests are more in depth. These are really more tests that are aiming now toward capacity and competency. They go more depth into someone's decisional ability. The previous tests really just go more into testing sort of a variety of domains, but they don't really ask about whether the domains are being integrated between one domain and another. These tests are a little bit more complex and get at a little bit more of the reasoning ability, the executive function, and real life scenarios. So, I would say that these are a higher level, are testing a higher level of capacity or competency. Next slide. And so when we talk about the mini mental state exam, the Folstein, this is a test that has 30 points. It takes about 15 minutes. And it tests a variety of different domains of the brain, as I said: orientation, visual spatial skills, calculation, verbal skills, immediate and short-term memory. So it's picking out different areas of brain function and seeing if this one works and if that one works and if this one works. But what it doesn't really do that well is seeing how those different domains are relating to each other. And that's really what you want to know when you're talking about capacity and a higher function of function. So these tests are commonly used, as I said, by APS workers, healthcare providers. It used to be just to track an individual's change in cognition over time. That was what it was originally used for, but now it's used more widely and often, sometimes inappropriately, I'm sorry to say. Next slide. And so, as we said before, you have to be careful. I don't think we need to repeat this, except to say that what is of interest on the MMSC and the MoCA for that matter is a score less than 16. Remember, 30 is the most you can get on that test. A score of less than 16 really does start to make you concerned about one's capacity. It doesn't mean they absolutely cannot make a decision, but it seems like the research has shown a score under 16 is pretty highly correlated with some impairment of capacity. And on the other side of it, a higher score, anything over 25, 26, you're pretty sure that that person probably retains capacity. Let me be clear, this is not 100%, right? This is just on average, that's basically true. Again, it's the MMSE is affected by race and by education, IQ, professional experience, etc. So I have my MMSE memorized, so when I finally get demented, I'll be able to sneak under the radar. Next slide.
All right, I just want to ask you one question. When we get medical records in a case, I have found that when we get the MMSE, we'll often get significantly higher scores than are revealed when we get a capacity assessment.
Yes.
When we get a MoCA and a SLUMS, to me, it seems to me like we're getting scores that are more consistent with what the capacity evaluation finds.
Thank you
Can you just talk about that?
Yes, thank you for saying that. And that is 100% true. So what the MoCA does is it has introduced a higher level or more executive function tests. And so that's what the mini mental was missing, the MMSE was missing. And it really gets more at one's ability to reason, one's ability to relate certain concepts to each other, and it's a higher. I agree. I think this is a test, and I think the field has shown this, that now pretty much everybody is using the MOCA for that reason. It's a more reliable screening test. I agree. And so finally, not finally, but for what we'll talk about now is something called the IDA. And so again, I want to give credit here to Applebaum and Grisso. And if you want to look them up, they are really one of the earliest couple of researchers who worked in this area of decision making. And again, Jason Karlawish, who developed a tool called the ACED, the Assessment of Capacity for Everyday Decision Making, ACED. And building on their principles, this test called the IDA was developed by us at Cornell and in association with many colleagues. And basically, it's an instrument for decisional ability, and it can pretty much be delivered by anybody. Again, it's a screening test, but what it asks is, can a person understand the relevant facts of a decision? This is a very decision-specific screening test. It's for one decision, not global decisions, one decision. Does the person understand the relevant facts? Do they understand that the problem affects them personally, called appreciation? This is something that they're experiencing personally. Can they express a decision or a plan to address the issue and weigh the pros and cons, which is reasoning, right, of making the decision they made? And are they consistent? So that's when we deal with dementia patients, and we, or even, well, mostly dementia patients, when we're wondering, do they really get it? We will often go back 2 and 3 times in the hospital to make sure that they are consistent in their decisions. So consistency is a big thing for us. If they're, if they really continue to make the same decision, we feel better about accepting whatever that decision is.
And this is a test that's starting to be used by APS.
It was designed to be
a really wonderful development.
Thank you, Paige. Yes, it was designed to be used by APS. We are seeing that it might have broader implications for instance, legal offices and other institutions. But basically, yes, that was why it was developed.
Okay, we're going to go to part 2 of the Mr. Phillips interview.
Lucky Strike Camel. I'm going to tell you 5 words, and I want you to repeat them to me.
Okay.
Face, velvet, church, daisy, red.
Face, velvet, church, daisy, red.
Great. I'm going to tell them to you one more time. Face, velvet, church, daisy, red.
Face, velvet, church, daisy, red.
Great. Now I'm going to ask you to remember them because I'm going to ask you them again in a few minutes. Okay?
No, I may not.
All right. Now I'd like for you to start with the number 100 and subtract 7.
Okay, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65.
That's good. Show off. Now I'm going to give you a pair of words, and I want you to tell me how they're similar. So for example, if I said banana and orange, you would tell me they're both fruit. Okay? A train and a bicycle.
Transportation.
Great. And what about a watch and a ruler?
Measurement.
Perfect. Okay. A few minutes ago, I asked you to remember 5 words. Do you remember what those words are?
No.
Okay. Do you remember that I gave you 5 words?
No.
Okay. I'm going to give you a clue and see if that helps jog your memory. One of the words is a part of the body. It was either arms, face, or hand.
Can't remember.
Okay. One of them was a type of cloth.
Can't remember.
It was either silk, velvet, or cotton?
Cotton?
Good. Another word is a type of a place.
Plate?
Place.
Place, yeah.
It was either a bank, church, or hospital.
Can't remember.
Okay. One of them was a flower.
Can't remember.
Okay. Rose, tulip, or daisy? Anything sound familiar?
I don't know. Daisy?
That's fine.
Yeah.
No, don't worry about it. We're
I'm
good.
not. I don't worry about those things.
Okay. And could you please?
Okay, let's do another poll. And I think we have 2 questions this time. Is Mr. Phillips competent to testify? Is the first question. Yes, no, or maybe. Let's answer that one. And let's see what our results are. So yes, 38%, no, 21%, and maybe 41%. Okay, and let's go on to, does he have capacity to gift money to his new friend? Yes, no, or maybe. Okay, what are those answers? Yes, he has capacity, 21%, no, 41%, maybe 38%. Ronnie, any initial responses to this?
Yeah, I mean, this is just such a classic example of why we're missing so much of what's going on with our patients, because when I first saw this video, I was like, this guy is great. Look how wonderful he's conversational. He remembers old information. He's relaying his life in a reasonable way. But when she gets to the point where he doesn't even remember that she asked him questions, it wasn't even so much that he forgot the 5 things, the 5 items, but that he didn't even remember that he was asked them. That is very, very significant. And so I think somebody like this, to make a decision about giving money away, I think we would probably err on the side that he lacked capacity for that decision, even though he looks so good on so many other domains, right? But in this case, he really how would he make a judgment about this if he can't about giving money, if he even forgot that he gave the money? So it's anyway, that would be on it.
And my guess is we don't know what his ability is to sort of describe the incident, so it's hard to answer the first question. My guess is he probably would be found competent to testify. But yeah, it seems like the capacity with money is problematic, especially by his own statement that his daughter helps him with his finances, and he clearly has issues with financial capacity. And a wrinkle for us as prosecutors is we have to prove, if our theory is that a victim lacked capacity to consent, we have to prove that was evident to the perpetrator. So in a case that probably would not be able to be our theory in a case like this, because he's so verbal and well-spoken.
So for a guy like this, for a gentleman like this, you would really, this is just another example of why you would have to do a really in-depth capacity evaluation.
Exactly.
Because you have to explore with him, can you tell me the pros of giving this money away? What are the cons of giving this money away? You'd really have to start getting into his reasoning process before you made an absolute decision. But it
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
Okay. But it is just he's such a good lesson to me of how easy it is for us to make assumptions just because someone's living alone, their house is clean, he's feeding himself, he probably goes to the grocery store by himself, and he's so articulate. We just cannot make assumptions. We've got to get more information. And it wasn't until he had that screening test by Dr. Mosqueda that you really could see how impaired he was. Okay, Ronnie, let's talk about finding capacity evaluators. Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
investigators and prosecutors really struggle with not being able to find someone to do these evaluations.
Yeah, this is really very, very hard. It's even hard for us, although I'm very fortunate to be in New York City, where we have, we have a lot of resources, and we have access to APS that will enable a formal psychiatric evaluation for patients. So that's lucky, but I realize that is not the case in many places. So who can do these? Psychiatrists, obviously, primary care physicians with geriatric experience and some training. I put a little bit of a clarifying statement on that. And neurologists, neuropsychologists, this is really what they do most of the time. They're very, very skilled in this. And I want to put a word out for forensic psychiatrists, because they are really at the crossroads of medicine and the legal system, and they're highly trained to do this kind of work. And I actually, in preparing this, did some Googling just to see, are they available? And in fact, I was surprised that there were a fair amount of agencies and or practices, forensic psychiatry practices, that could be accessed. And so clinical psychologists as well, the American Psychological Association website is up there if you're interested in trying to contact them. So that's the kind of group that I think is skilled in doing these kinds of evaluations. Next slide. And so if you're in an area where you have an academic medical center, you can try to tap into any of those divisions: neurology, geriatric, psychiatry, neuropsychology. Probably won't have a forensic psychiatrist, but academic medical centers will have, might be a good place for you to look. As I said, APS, elder lawyers, and then professional organizations, like I mentioned, the American Psychological Association, Bar Association for Elder Law. Those are all options for you.
And Ronnie, in our community, we have a licensed mental health counselor who has extensive experience in doing these assessments. So also think outside the box. There might be other professionals in this area who can really be of help.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So I think we're wrapping up. We have 3 minutes left. I don't know if there's any questions anyone wants to put in the chat, or if we should just go ahead and conclude, but we'll look in the chat here and see if somebody's going to have anything for us.
There were a few comments and questions about how you get someone to participate in the assessment when they are unwilling. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously super difficult. It's all about, like so many things in medicine and law for that matter, it's a matter of establishing trust. It may not be that, that this is a one-time evaluation, that you have to, frame it in that this is a matter of concern, that you're concerned about the individual, and sort of lay out the facts in a gentle way so that they can really see it. I often put things in writing so they can revisit it if they're not with me, to actually, have them process it. But you're right, it's very, very difficult. And if someone doesn't want to participate, I don't know that I have any real tricks other than trying to build as much trust and show as much concern as you can.
And we found that the evaluators who go to the person's home often have more luck, and that if the person truly does have dementia, their judgment may be impaired, so they may be much more willing to answer questions than someone who doesn't. But they also are so certain that they don't have an impairment that they're often willing to submit to an evaluation in order to show people that they're actually fine, even though they may not be.
I worked with a geriatric psychiatrist who was brilliant at this, and he didn't ask any of these, check the box questions that we just went through. He did it in a very conversational way, coming at it, in terms of open-ended questions, and then, sort of sneaking in more factual questions, you know, in the setting of that. He was very good at it, but it requires a real skill. It's a real, you know, not everybody is so skilled.
So I
Well,
just want to thank you all so much for coming. And I want to also thank Dr. Mosqueda, OBW, NCAL, and OBC and DOJ for putting this on. This is such an important topic, and it is in desperate need of its attention. And so I'm just so grateful to have been part of this. So thank you all. Feel free to reach out to Ronnie and me if you have questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. LoFaso and Paige. We never have enough time for these topics. We could go all day. So we will work on bringing you more. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and have a great day.
You too.
You too.